It may occur to you whilst watching this episode that someone has slipped a psychoactive substance into your drink. Well, they haven't. Unless they have, of course. But for most of you, they haven't. Everything you see today is real. Oh boy. Spider-Man's first cartoon series, and the one with the best remembered theme tune, was launched in 1967 and helped to boost the broader profile of the still new character. It lasted for 3 series until 1970, but of course was repeated ad infinitum over the following years. For a decade or so, this was the only cartoon about the webhead. Then, in 1981, a new series came along entitled Spider-Man. Oh, that's it. Just Spider-Man.
Spider-Man!
The motivation for this series was to try to trigger interest from the networks in a new live-action Spider-Man show, after that god-awful one from a few years previously. That strategy didn't work. Not only that, but as much as the likes of NBC were interested in the cartoon, they thought that it lacked something to make it even more appealing. How about we throw a couple more superheroes into the mix? Friends for Spidey to hang out with. The Human Torch is popular, so he has to be in it. Who would be a good foil for the Torch? How about Iceman? Fire and ice and Spidey in the middle. Perfect. But there was a problem. The rights to use the Torch on the screen were part owned by Universal Studios, who wanted to make a movie focused on the hothead. This was the same reason that saw him replaced by Herbie the Robot in the 1978 Fantastic Four cartoon series. Universal just didn't want to see him anywhere but on the big screen. So he was out, but that idea of 2 heroes with opposing powers lingered. And so, as a solution, Marvel created a brand new character, Angelica Jones, aka Firestar. With all 3 heroes in place, the series went to air in 1981, the same year that the solo series began. It is bizarre that both of them started in the same year, albeit the solo series was first to air. The same production company worked on both, although different voice actors were used for Peter and May Parker, who appeared in both series. The lesser remembered solo series lasted just 1 season and 26 episodes. Its better known counterpart lasted 3 seasons, albeit they only totalled 24 episodes. Even so, it was popular at the time and is still looked back on fondly today. A bit of cross-promotion? Why not? After all, the cartoon gave Marvel Comics some publicity, so it's only right that Marvel Comics give the cartoon some publicity. As hard as it is to believe, this comic was on general release, and it coincided with the show's launch to help raise its profile. The story isn't original. It's an adaptation of the show's first episode, which means that, like the show, it isn't set in standard Marvel continuity, that of Earth 616. It does have an official designation, in case you're wondering, and that is Earth 8107. We have looked at comic book adaptations of films before, but adaptations of cartoons, well, this will be a first, but hopefully not the last. This cover was composed by a couple of artists with strong Spider-Man ties, John Romita Jr. and Al Milgrom. The internal art was provided by Dan Spiegel on pencils, and the go-to inker for Marvel at that time, Vince Colletta. Dennis Marks adapted it from his original screenplay. He was primarily a writer of cartoon series, not just The Amazing Friends, but also undoubtedly another one that you watched growing up. Dungeons and Dragons, Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, even Batfink, plus loads more. Come on then, this should be entertaining. Bring it on! Bear in mind, this isn't just the trio's first appearance in a Marvel comic book, but it is Firestar's first ever appearance in a Marvel comic book. And as such, they all get brief intros on the title page, as does the lovable Ms. Lion. Interestingly, they've also included a kind of disclaimer on this page. It explains that the main characters and story may seem delightfully different from what you're used to seeing in our normal colour comics. But this is for the fun of it, so hang loose and enjoy. I'll do my best. The villain in this issue is the Green Goblin, by which I mean Norman Osborn, a character who was dead, believed dead, at this point in standard continuity. He's on his way back in a private plane, fresh from the sanitarium, where he has been treated for the mental illness that makes him believe that he is the Green Goblin. He had been there for 3 years, but the doctors now say that he is cured, and he is happy to accept that. However, in his hurry to get away from the place, he insisted that his pilot fly in stormy conditions, a decision which now comes back to haunt him, as the plane is struck by lightning. I say plane, but the pilot seems to think it's a boat of some kind. Both the pilot and Norman manage to bail out, but Norman's rough landing has an adverse effect on him, of the worst kind. At Aunt May's boarding house in Shady Glen, Peter and his friends are getting ready to attend the Eastern State University superhero party. Angelica Jones is going as Spider-Woman, giving Aunt May the opportunity to show us that she thinks that Spider-Woman is just as awful as Spider-Man. And her friend is going as Medusa. Her friend, by the way, is Norma Osborn, niece of Norman. Yes, that's right, Norma Osborn. For some reason, they decided against using Harry. Bobby Drake is going as Captain America, and Peter is going as Spider-Man, a character that turns out to be a particularly popular choice. There are plenty of other characters there though, and not all of them heroes. Speaking of villains, the Green Goblin is there, although it turns out that's another one of the revellers in a Green Goblin outfit. In fact, there are a couple of them, both of them with goblin gliders suspended from the ceiling by wires. Wow, that is some dedication to fancy dress. But something isn't right, because Pete's spider sense is tingling. So he leaves the party and undergoes a startling transformation. Not in these circumstances. His spider sense leads him to Norman Osborn's old lab, which is on the university campus. And upon entering, he discovers that the real Green Goblin is also in town. Norman donated the lab to the university, and when he did so, he left there his greatest treasure, the Goblin formula. Now he's come back for it because he wants to use that to turn everybody in New York into Green Goblins. Angelica has noticed that Peter's been gone for a while, and she sets out to investigate, unwittingly rebuffing Bobby in the process. Just as the Goblin discovers that his formula is missing, we see on the very next page an advert for NBC Superstar Saturday, including Spider-Man and his amazing friends. Just as the Goblin reasons that his niece, who is a student at Eastern State University, will know where the Goblin formula is hidden, Angelica is heard outside in the hallway. So, taking his leave, the Goblin leaves a trap. As Angelica opens the door, she will detonate a Goblin grenade filled with liquid nitrogen. Both she and Spider-Man will freeze. And indeed, she does set off the trap. Although shortly before, Spidey was able to maneuver himself away from the grenade and even shout out a warning. Thanks to that, Angelica Jones, now changed into Firestar, reacts quickly to the danger, creating a heat shield to counter the freezing cold of the liquid nitrogen. There is a lot of liquid nitrogen though, and she's afraid that she won't be able to hold it all off, that she will crystallise? I assume you mean freeze. Anyway, Spider-Man, webs, threat over, you know the drill. With the Goblin going after Norma, there's only one thing for it. Back to the party! Bobby is with Norma, wowing her with his wit, when suddenly the Green Goblin swoops down and takes her away. Bobby is impressed with how well that student has rigged up the wires on the Goblin glider before he realises that they're outside. And that must have been the real Green Goblin. Bobby quickly changes into Iceman, although not in the way that we're all familiar with from the show, before all three heroes split up in an attempt to find the Goblin. The Goblin and Norma are at Osborn's old factory, and she has already given him the Goblin formula. However, he wants to make sure that it works, and she will make the perfect test subject. Not if Spidey can help it, which he can, destroying that dose of Goblin formula and snagging the Goblin glider with a web line as Norman tries to escape. But Spidey hasn't planned ahead, and as the glider gets higher and higher, the Goblin finally manages to shake the wall crawler off. Luckily for him, he has some very useful friends. Not only does Iceman save him from his fall, but Firestar has seen the Goblin making his way towards Central Park. Clearly, still being in possession of the rest of the Goblin formula, he intends to throw that into the reservoir, contaminating the city's drinking water and fulfilling his plan. Now, these have been a fun, dynamic couple of pages, but they really do show the lack of reading in this comic. Maybe they thought that would make it more appealing to younger readers. Also, there's a real lack of work on any backgrounds. Anyway, it is fun, and the fun isn't over yet. As at the city reservoir, the Goblin announces that he triumphs at last and empties the Goblin formula into the reservoir. I wondered why it was called that. Oh well, it seems he has won, as long as he doesn't jinx it. Oh, too late, because he's announced that nothing can stop him now. Spidey shows that he's learnt nothing from their last encounter, but he does let go of the web line just as the Green Goblin flies into some power cables. So that's the Goblin dealt with, but what about the Goblin formula? Are you forgetting that Spider-Man has some pretty amazing friends? Iceman and Firestar, as well as swapping silly nicknames, have been busy. Not only has Iceman frozen the entire reservoir, but Firestar then melts around the part that contains the Goblin formula because it hasn't yet mixed with the rest of the water, so that it can safely be removed. Plus, it seems that that shock from the power cables has wiped Norman's memory of the events of the last couple of days. And our adventure ends the way that any self-respecting 1980s cartoon would, with banter between our main characters and Ms. Lion being adorable. Cue ribald laughter from all involved, and I dare say a cute little yap from Ms. Lion as the camera fades. And that's it. The adventure is over. It was a faithful adaptation of the cartoon, with the occasional little tweak here and there, although it did miss out the opening scene, which in fairness didn't really relate to the rest of the storyline, but bearing in mind the contents of this were so light, it could have done with a bit of padding. So that was issue 1 of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. It wasn't the greatest, but even so, it is disappointing to learn that it was also the last official Amazing Friends comic. It was reprinted in 1989 under the title Marvel Action Universe, but that was just a reprint, not an extra official appearance. I know you, and I know nothing gets past you. You're there now thinking, we know this wasn't set in the standard Marvel continuity, so why does he keep saying official? Well, Marvel Comics were there primarily to sell comics, along with the occasional bit of cross-media merchandising. But it wasn't completely unknown for characters owned by Marvel, particularly Spider-Man, to pimp themselves out for commercial reasons. Sometimes this was actually for a noble cause. For example, when Spidey appeared in a Pizza Hut promotional comic in 1994, coincidentally alongside Firestar, it wasn't so much to sell pizzas, but to draw attention to the dangers of substance abuse. When, 12 years later, he joined forces with Marvel's First Family and stationery suppliers Office Max, it wasn't to plug their wide range of products. Okay, there was a bit of that going on, but it was also to recognise the contribution that hard-working teachers made to society. On other occasions, it was publicity, pure and simple, And back in 1983, that is exactly what some organisations wanted from an association with Marvel's hottest cartoon show of the decade. As such, our terrific trio appeared in a comic released that very year to promote the Dallas Ballet. It looks like a proper comic, doesn't it? And in many ways it is. It was written by Jim Salicrup, one of Marvel's leading editors in the 1980s. The art was from longtime Spider-Man artist Jim Mooney. But look, it's very honest as to its nature when it says advertising supplement. It is one big advert. You couldn't buy it, well, not on its own anyway. It was a free giveaway with the Dallas Times Herald, hence the Dallas Ballet. So how do you produce a crossover between superheroes and a ballet company? Unfortunately, there's only one way to find out. Angelica is moving to Dallas, and to celebrate, she's taking Peter and Bobby to the ballet. Yeah, thanks, Angelica. However, they don't even make it into the theatre before Peter's spider sense warns him of danger. It seems someone is engaged in some unsolicited removals from the ballet, no less, as they are stealing props essential to that night's performance. I'm sure stealing ballet props is big business in the criminal world. Our heroes quickly change and take on the would-be thieves. But this battle seems to have special rules. It has to involve either oversized or undersized objects. Nonetheless, our heroes make quick work of it. That is before the criminal mastermind behind this theft appears. His name? Daddy Longlegs. And no, I couldn't have said that any slower. You said it, Bobby. I know. Daddy Longlegs is just typical of the kind of character created specifically for this kind of half-baked commercial tie-in. But he wasn't. This is the cover of issue 47 of Spider-Woman from the previous year. And look who is lurking in the shadows, who has actually got themselves onto the cover. It is indeed our new favourite villain, Daddy Longlegs. In this issue, Jessica Drew is trying to track down an undersized, failed dancer who drank down a few of Bill Foster's untested growth potions. When she finds him, she discovers that he has been endowed with unnatural growth and has taken on the name Daddy Longlegs. So he was a legitimate villain from the 616 universe, albeit he only had one or two more appearances. One of those was a flashback. As for this comic, we now have a brief interlude as it earned its money back with some regional adverts containing some arbitrarily placed superheroes. If the Hulk doesn't get you down to Morgan Boots, then Spidey will definitely get all the kids flocking to the patio door shop. The good news is we now have a fight, as Daddy Longlegs takes on our heroes whilst also filling the reader in on his background. Our heroes are actually struggling to defeat him. Not because he's got super speed, because he's such a good mover. If they want to win, they're going to have to use teamwork. Before we see how that unfolds, I've got to point out another advert, and I just love this one. Does it seem like your allowance just doesn't buy as much these days? Are you tired of taking handouts from your folks? Get a job and stop whining. The Amazing Friends plan is to aggravate Daddy Longlegs, to distract him, kind of the verbal equivalent of tying his shoelaces together. Firestar is all in, as she calls him an ungraceful clod, and that works a treat because Daddy Longlegs hates being laughed at. Whilst he is preaching to her about how he is an artiste, it looks like Spider-Man is taking that shoelace prank even further. And as Iceman practically shouts, "Follow me, it's a trap," Daddy Longlegs comes crashing to earth. But what to do with him? Well, you're going to have to wait to find out about that one. In the meantime, Peter, Bobby and Angelica have finally made it to see the Nutcracker. Whilst they're waiting for the show to start, Angelica reads to them the history of the Nutcracker. Then the curtain raises and we see... What the? There are some puzzles in this comic. There are a few more adverts. But the rest of the storyline is the Nutcracker. It's like we're sitting there in the auditorium watching it, unfortunately. We get wonderful characters, sublime dancing, and a festive happily ever after. But I don't care. I want superheroes and villains fighting. Eventually, we are reunited with our heroes in the last 2 panels. Also, we are shown what actually happened to Daddy Longlegs. Nice of you to remind us what we all came here for. It seems he's been put on ice whilst the police begin to read him his rights. I suppose I shouldn't be too hard on it. After all, its entire reason for being was to advertise the Dallas Ballet. I just didn't expect so much dancing. It wasn't a one-off either, because that very same year we got this. What are they advertising this time? Why, it's May D&F Department Store in Denver, Colorado, for all your lifestyle needs. Do you think there'll be a lot of adverts in this one? I'll tell you what it doesn't have. Credits. They were probably too ashamed. It could be the same creative team as the last one, but I don't want to slander them. Actually, it does at least have a classic villain, rather than that thing we had before. Go on then, get on with it. It doesn't take long for this issue to start earning its money back, because Iceman features in an advert straight away on the inside cover. Actually, it's for Calvin Klein. Pretty cool, Iceman. Then, once we get the mandatory character introductions out of the way, we see a headline, printed rather appropriately in the Denver Post, telling us that the president is due to visit NORAD. Okay, well that sounds more like a genuine comic book storyline, so maybe this issue won't be a fake out after all. The friends are on their holidays, planning on doing some caving in the Colorado mountains. Before they do that though, they stop off at May D&F Department Store. Fair enough, I suppose. As long as we don't follow their shopping trip for half of the issue, it's going to be an improvement on the previous one. Actually, it is a surprisingly brief visit, lasting only 2 panels. But that's still long enough to show Angelica that the others are typical men. She actually said it. Soon enough, we and the gang move on to the caves. And it's a fun little visit, although there is some sinister shadow lurking in the background. That is this issue's big villain, whose identity is revealed, but not before we have Iceman featuring in another advert. So who do you think it is? I can tell you that it is a classic villain. Now, we've already had the Green Goblin. It isn't him again. So who is it? The Vulture? Dr. Octopus? The Rhino? No. It's the Abomination. I said he was a classic villain. I didn't say he was a classic Spider-Man villain. But how odd is that? If they wanted a super strong adversary, then why not the Rhino? He'd have been perfect. But no, instead we get a classic Hulk villain. Very bizarre. But, let's be honest, not the most bizarre thing we've seen today. The Abomination sees what he calls kids and thinks that they could ruin his plans. So he causes a cave-in to trap them there. Or so he thinks, because Peter's spider sense warned him in time. So he manages to free himself and he sees his foe, thinking, holy cow, it's the Abomination. I'm surprised he even knows who that is. Anyway, the Abomination's plan is a classic one. It is for world domination. And he sees the military NORAD base as key to that. Gaining access via an unguarded ventilation shaft, and after Firestar has got in on the modelling business, he finds himself in the control room, where he continues ranting about how great his plan is, whilst watching the president arrive on the security screen. However, he is soon surprised by Spider-Man, saying, I don't know how you got here, the same way you did, but your powers are no match for mine, which Spidey can't deny. He realises the only way he can stand a chance is if he irritates the Abomination and makes him lose his temper. Wonder where he got that idea from. Although he has a bit of success, he is still hopelessly out of his depth. Luckily for him, he's got amazing friends. Iceman tries something obvious, but the Abomination breaks out of his ice handcuffs, sending shards of ice flying towards the others. Luckily, no problem, thanks to Firestar. The action is then interrupted by 4 pages of adverts, and when we return, the President is actually at the base, although not yet in the control room. Spider-Man sees this on the security screens, and realising the danger posed to the POTUS, knows that they have to get the Abomination out of there pronto. They do this by using their super quips. Iceman says a king needs a cool head. Firestar wants to know if he can take the heat. And Spider-Man asks how he is at arms control. Eventually these puns break the Abomination and he chases after the friends as they flee back down the ventilation shaft, just in time for the arrival of the President, who asks his fellow Americans why there are chunks of melting ice around the control room. We then have a brief chase sequence as our friends are closely pursued by a slipping and sliding Abomination. But such a big lump cannot easily be stopped on a slide, and strangely off-panel he is encased in ice. As Spidey says, since the gamma radiation made him cold-blooded like a lizard, covering him completely in ice stopped him cold. And they leave him in that state by the roadside for the Air Force to pick up when they next pass. So that's all tied up. There's still time left for a shopping trip. Oh no, I take it back. They've gone back to the caves. This turns out not to be a great decision because they get lost. Eventually, when they find their way out, Peter says this would never happen to Spider-Man. Well, it did. They then stop off for a barbecue and a bit of a chat. Got to get that page count up. Before then seeing the Air Force drive by with their new acquisition. I hate to say it, but despite the numerous adverts, that was pretty enjoyable. This is how commercial tie-ins should be done. Plus, I also now know where to get a comfortable new pair of slacks at a price that's right for me. Kinda makes me wish that May DNF did another Marvel tie-in. That comic had no right to be that enjoyable. Sadly, other than repeats of the cartoon, that was it for the Spider Friends. Well, I suppose there was this.
This is your friend Spider-Man asking you to come and see us come to life in Hardee's new 3D theater meals. You will definitely want to collect all 6 at Hardee's.
Yeah, American fast food chain Hardee's released a series of promotional 3D mini-comics in that same busy year of 1983, featuring the stars from that advert. A different character featured each week, which meant that one starred Spider-Man. I don't have that. One featured Iceman. I don't have that either. And one featured Firestar. I don't have that either. Only kidding. There it is. Tiny, isn't it? Again, the creative team are shrouded in mystery due to a lack of credits. I have intended to feature 3D comic books before. I have a 3D edition of issue 300 of The Amazing Spider-Man that I wanted to show you, but my test images just didn't work. I suspect because there were too many other colours on the page. But even with more traditional non-coloured 3D comics, the effect on the screen is more questionable than on the page. Should we have a look at it anyway? First of all, you need a pair of 3D glasses. Don't pretend you don't have any. You're an adult watching a YouTube channel about superhero comics. Of course you own 3D glasses. The images are printed in red and green, so you'd have thought that the red and green variety of glasses would work best, but to be honest, the red and blue seem to work just as well. You go off and get your glasses, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, here we go. Oh, okay. Blimey. Okay. Like that is it? Okay, right, fine, fair enough. Let's have a look. Yeah, it works. Mostly. The origin of the fabulous Firestar. Yeah, this whole thing is basically an introduction to the character. What I do tend to find with 3D comics is that they are very difficult to actually read. So I find myself switching between glasses on to look at the images and glasses off to read the captions and word balloons. Firestar's status as a mutant is confirmed straight away, as we're told a child of the atom, Angelica Jones was born with mysterious mutant powers. Born with mysterious mutant powers? Is that how mutants work? Okay, I take it back, because the very next panel says that as a teenager, she discovered that she had the astonishing power to control heat. And let's be honest, if we had superpowers, rather than fighting crime, we probably would use them for things such as making popcorn. We get an Angelica to Firestar transformation, as we are told that with great power also came great responsibility. Isn't that copyrighted? Her ability to fly is explained in a very effective panel, as we're told that she raises her body temperature until it is lighter than air. I know that doesn't make sense scientifically, but it's something. We see her create a heat shield. Most of this image works, although that gun that's nearer to us, I think it's bringing on an aneurysm. More good work on the next one, particularly the speech bubble, although I'm not so sure about the guy in the background. Or is it guys, plural? Page 8 is pretty good, but page 9 is the highlight, where it tells us she has fought many fearsome foes, side by side with her friends. Yes, there they are, Spider-Man and his amazing friends, in comic book form, in 3D. My life is complete. And then the last page actually looks better without glasses on. Now we know how these images work, don't we? We have basically the same image printed twice in two different colours. There are slight variations between the two images though, and where the two lines are closest it appears flatter, and where they're further apart that gives the illusion of depth. So we've got two slightly different views of the same thing, much like our eyes in real life. This last image, it drops the ball a bit on that front, because we see Firestar flying above the buildings of New York. Some of the lines are closer together, some further apart. But look, at the back here, that big skyscraper, the two different images are just too different. Through the blue lens, it's a building. Through the red, it's part of that building and that odd oblong thing beside it. Another really narrow building? I don't know. But it isn't on the first image. And as such, it just looks confused rather than three-dimensional. Do you know what? I don't care if it doesn't always work perfectly. This is still a great item. I would own all of them if they weren't all so expensive. Are they expensive or are they overpriced? They're Marvel superheroes from the 1980s in 3D. How could they possibly be overpriced? Great stuff. So what happened to the Spider Friends after 1983? Well, Iceman had already been around for a couple of decades, and he remained a mainstay of the Marvel Universe as a member of the New Defenders and then X-Factor. Firestar was a little different, of course, being created specifically for the cartoon. But she did make her debut in the Earth 616 continuity in issue 193 of the Uncanny X-Men, cover dated May 1985, before then getting her own limited series the following year, and then going on to become a founding member of the New Warriors. And then, in 1991, in issue 75 of Web of Spider-Man, not only did Spidey meet Firestar for the first time in mainstream Marvel continuity, but the band very nearly got back together. As another guest star in that issue, Iceman, left the scene just before Firestar entered. At least they shared the same page. Since then, Marvel has, once or twice, dipped their toe into the pool of nostalgia, of course. But nothing can compare to those 1980s adventures, either on the screen or on the page. At least we can be confident that we will never see such eccentric comic books again. Will we? Will we? Oh yes, we will. We will.